What's up, my friends, and welcome into the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. As always, we are brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use that promo code BBPHLY for 15% off your first purchase. We are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. Tyler Zulli, Fran Duffy. Penn State gets the win 34-0. And that's the story, or it should be, right? A shutout victory should probably be the entirety of the story, but a lot to unpack in this game. But before we get into all of that, first and foremost, Fran, as always, a happy Tuesday to you. And another week of college football is in the books, a pretty good one for the most part.
Yeah, another week of college football. We had some upsets going on around the country, and that's the thing. As you're talking about a 34-0 win, like it could definitely be worse when you're looking at some of the other top programs. But I think at the end of the day, too, like not only did we get a great slate of college football, we had a great week one of the NFL. So this was the first full like Saturday to Sunday and really like Thursday through Monday kind of slate where you had both sports going. It's the best time of year.
Well, when we talk about our friends over at Xfinity, the quad box is like a must now. You know, you've got the one game on with sound, but you've got the 4 games on. Your eyeballs are doing this, right? Your head is spinning because you've got, you know, especially with college football, you've got 10 games on at once. It's kind of hard to keep your eyes on. So I don't know which games you got a chance to watch other than Penn State. I caught a lot of the Ole Miss game, and then I caught the end of the Mississippi State and Arizona State game. And before we even get into Penn State, you want to talk about it could be worse. Talk about blown coverage down the stretch in the Arizona State game. They go down the field, they take the lead, and then, just a bomb, with about 30 seconds to play. Talk about a missed opportunity for a team that was in the college football playoff just a year ago.
Yeah, I was feeling it for our friends down at PHNX on that one because the Mississippi State jumped out to the early lead. It looked like Arizona State kind of took control back, and I'm like, all right, they can escape with a win. To me, like you're the Big 12, like that. It is so critical to have those wins against an SEC team, even though Mississippi State is at the bottom of the barrel, perceived going into this season in the SEC, you'd still like to be able to come away with that W. So that's a tough loss, certainly, for Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils.
That's Mississippi State's first victory against a Power 4 school in quite a few years.
Yeah.
So a turnaround, I guess, at least a start. But we'll talk more about the landscape of college football towards the end of the show. We'll give both of our power rankings. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. They're not terribly different. So we'll talk a little bit about it later in the show. But let's start here. 34-0. It is the 13th shutout for Penn State in the last 10 seasons. They forced 2 turnovers. Katron Allen maybe put together his best statistical game of his career. The team rushed for 200 yards. They allowed just 4 yards per play. That should be the story. We should not have a whole lot to complain about. But I think we may be past that's good enough with this Penn State roster. And it's a reason why on the first show we talked about national title contention. It's a reason why last year they were in the college football playoff semifinal and were maybe 1 or 2 plays going the other way in light of maybe getting to a national championship. These types of wins are great, but maybe you need a little bit more. And so I texted you, and the word that I've been using, I think it's almost like the word of the day, very Sesame Street-esque, is inefficient. It felt like there was some inefficiencies on the offensive side of the ball. And yes, they scored the 2 touchdowns late to kind of make it a much more lopsided score than what it actually was. But that to me was kind of the storyline, was they left some meat on the bone. And I think James Franklin even brought it up in his press conference this week. They definitely left some meat on the bone this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, and not to beat a dead horse, we've talked about it the last couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about it today, and we're going to talk about it next week. Really, then we got the bye week after that. So when we talk about it the week after, is the first stretch, this opening stretch of the season for Penn State, to me, is all about really getting that passing game with Drew Aller and these new receivers up to speed, trying to build as good of a rapport as possible. There are going to be bumps in the road. It's not always going to be hunky-dory. It's not always going to look crisp, clean, and efficient. It's almost like a preseason for a new team working with a new offense or a new scheme, new personnel. You're trying to get those guys to build that rapport best you can. Last week against Nevada, you saw some big plays down the field. You saw Aller really stretch the field. There was the big touchdown to Hudson rolling to his left. He hit Pena on a couple nice outbreakers from the opposite hash that really kind of caught my eye. This week, I thought that there was a little bit more with Allen, just trying to get him up to speed. I think at the end of the day, the pass game this past week was up and down. Aller had a couple of bad misses. I wouldn't say all of it was completely on him either. Trevor Pena not on the same page on 2 straight plays, 2 straight drives there in the first half. Dinkins had a couple of drops. So it wasn't like, oh man, Drew Aller was terrible against FIU. Obviously, he wasn't terrible. Sure. But I think at the end of the day, it was an inconsistent day, certainly for the pass game. Had some highs, but then had some plays that they'd certainly like to have back.
Yeah, James Franklin basically said, I hope in the Lash building, as I'm speaking, they've got the jugs machine going when he was doing his press conference. Because you're right, there were quite a couple drops and a couple of, not as crisp routes as you would hope and things like that, timing and whatnot. So just to kind of get through the timeline of the game, because I think there's 2 separate things that I kind of looked at. The first one, of course, is the score. Because if you're just looking at the scores at halftime at the end of the third quarter, there is maybe a question mark of what's going on. Why is this happening, right? Because it was 10-0 at halftime. Ryan Barker had a long field goal attempt blocked right before the half. So 10-0 at halftime. Basically 2/3 of the way through the third quarter into nearly towards the fourth quarter, it was 13-0. It was 20-0 at the end of the third. They tack on those 2 touchdowns late in the end of the fourth quarter with about 4 minutes left to make it feel like a much more secure, lopsided win. And I'm going to say this right off the rip. At no point did I feel like, wow, they could lose this game. They were the more talented team by quite a bit on both sides of the ball. And the defense, we're going to highlight a lot more later in the show. I felt like the defense at every step was not just better than FIU's offense, but like seismically better than FIU's offense. But as you brought up with Drew Aller and timing and things like that, completed 57% of his passes, had 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over. But as you brought up, I tend to agree with you. The timing felt a little bit weird. And then the second thing, I think if you break it down into drive by drive in the first half, the first drive of the game, they have a 3rd and 4 on FIU's 47, an incomplete pass. They decide to go for it on 4th down, 4th and 4, another incomplete pass. They turn the ball over on downs. The next drive, probably the most efficient drive of the half. They go right down the field, score a touchdown, punch it in for 6. Following that, they go 10 plays, 54 yards, another drive that ends on downs, and one that was 4th and 2. You figure give the ball to Katron, and you're feeling pretty good. He gets stopped at FIU's 22, so just outside of the red zone. Then they go 3 and out. They kick a field goal, and on that field goal, too, they started at the 37, so they really only got a handful of yards on 8 plays or so. And then Ryan Barker had the field goal blocked to end the half. So the first half, I think, they dominated in terms of like, this should be 27-0 or 20-0 or whatever it might be. But they had 2 turnovers on downs inside FIU territory, 1 just outside the red zone. They had a field goal block. They had an inefficient drive that led to a punt. It just felt like there was a lot left to be desired in that first half. And some of it was, as you brought up, timing. And I thought there was a little bit too, like we talked last week about vanilla and doing that intentionally. This one felt a little bit too conservative unintentionally, especially that 4th and 2 run with Katron, where it just felt like they kind of shoved him into the back of the offensive line and said, hey, pick us up 2 yards. Yeah,
on that play, they ran kind of like they were basically reading the backside linebacker on that play. And I actually thought it was a bad read by Aller personally, where and I get it was a little bit muddy because the linebacker attacked downhill and then broke towards the sideline towards Allen. So maybe he thought, okay, this is going to be a give, so I'm going to give it to Allen. But to me, he should have kept it on that play. They've made it a point really multiple times this offseason to talk about how Drew Aller's gotten more athletic and he's more nimble and he can do more with his feet. He showed some flashes certainly of being able to do that a year ago, but I still think at the end of the day, like he's not going to be the, you look around the nation right now, like Lenore Sellers, John Mateer, like he's not that kind of playmaker with his feet. So he needs to be a good decision maker, right? To kind of offset that. And so when I look at that kind of play, I'm like, man, like, all right, like you can get away with that in a game against FIU. You can get away with that in a game against Nevada last week. But when you play Oregon, when you play the best teams in the Big Ten, that's not going to be the case. And that's, again, that's what these first 3 weeks are going to be all about. You can play with your food a little bit and be okay. Get out of these games with a win. At the end of the day, the style points don't necessarily matter at this juncture because Penn State is still going to be, in the top 5 of pretty much everybody's poll that's voted in the AP. You're still going to have that standing. it really only is going to matter when you start to get into the conference play, when you start getting into these games against some of the best defenses, some of the best offenses you're going to face on the schedule. So that's fine. You're going to have you want to iron these wrinkles out by the time you get to that point.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, James Franklin brought it up, was he talked about the offensive line, and he was talking about physicality. And I know it's something you've monitored quite a bit with guys like Drew Shelton and a bunch of other Venga Ioana, and especially too with this group that's had to replace quite a few offensive linemen, some veteran offensive linemen, and now is the veterans themselves. I think he brought up physicality, and he talked about how it's really difficult to match game physicality in today's football because they go a lot of shell. They go a lot of like not go to the ground type of contact. And he said it wasn't really there in game one. He said it was there much more in game two. And he kind of brought up, he said, listen, there is an expectation for this offensive line, and it should be. It's one of the best in recent history. It's one of the better Penn State offensive lines in recent history. And he said that the one thing they did kind of struggle with, A, was the physicality in week one, much better in week two. And then B, they had to do a better job of identifying the mic and identifying the fronts that they're facing. And I think maybe that goes to your point earlier in the show about missteps in timing and Drew Aller's communication with his receivers and things like that. You've done an extensive amount of work on this offensive line. Anything that you saw on Saturday that maybe they built upon or that they need to continue to build upon?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, yeah, it was more impressive this week than the previous week against Nevada. I will say, like, I have been left a little bit wanting from the group overall, just considering the fact that it is a senior-laden group, and they did come in with such accolades from I know James Franklin, that coaching staff said that, they believe they've got 8, 9 starters, on that group, guys that could be starting elsewhere that are coming off the bench for this offensive line. So, the big thing is, look, Venga Ioane, the left guard, awesome. Like, he's powerful. He's a mauler at the point of attack. Drew Shelton, as rock steady as they come. He's more athlete than he is like mauler anyway. But I just think, again, like overall, you have Nick Dawkins, who's like the heartbeat of that offense and the leader, the captain on that side of the ball. I just expected a little bit more in terms of just like blowing people off the ball against a lower level of competition. You're not going up against like Ohio State and Oregon in these games. So I would expect a little bit more there. So that is something that I'm also kind of like keeping in the back of my mind when they get into these bigger games for a team that will want to run the ball with Allen and with Singleton. I do think that offensive line in terms of just like mashing people, like Ioane, I think is going to be that kind of guy, but you need more. It takes more than just one guy if you're going to really kind of establish it that way as a unit.
So it wasn't all bad, right? 34-0. There's a lot of good that comes out of that, regardless of who you play, the talent level of your opponent. And I think the standout offensively, of course, was Kaytron Allen. To me, it was one of his better games. And you can think about, he had that big bust-out run at the end of the game, 67-yard touchdown run that really kind of bolsters his numbers, which were 16 for 144 and a score. 9 yards a carry is just insane. But my thing is, I love the other runs, the runs that don't include the big run. And how do you play and how do your numbers look outside of those other runs? Because were you just a one-burst guy and you happen to hit for 67 and you finished with 90? Because that's an inefficient day. But with Kaytron on Saturday, if you take that 67-yard run out, he still ended up on 77 yards on 15 touches, which was still good for over 5 yards a carry. To me, he has established himself as an ultimate patience runner. You talked about it a couple weeks ago, about his vision and his patience. He's not going to kill you with the home run explosive play, but his patience behind the line, his ability to allow plays to develop, his ability to then get out in the open space. And I think he's actually put on a little bit of a burst. You saw it on that big run where he got to the second level. I thought the best part of that run wasn't the breakaway, wasn't the touchdown. It was the tiptoe around the sideline to stay in bounds, to get around a couple defenders, breaks free of the second level, and then he's gone. And I thought it was a really effective run, and it was a really impressive run, even more so than just saying, hey, he went for 67 and a score. I think that Kaytron Allen's becoming a more and more and more complete back each and every week, and especially heading into this season with how good he was last season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in that I think he is showing a little bit more juice than what we saw from him in years past. And if he can still be that like singles and doubles hitter, and hit for average in that way, you mentioned the efficiency outside of the long run, and then you sprinkle in some of those long runs, And you're cooking with gas. I think like the upside comp, if he were to hit and be like an NFL starter, moving to the next level, which obviously he's got a lot more to accomplish before getting to that point. Like Kyron Williams, Williams has been with the LA Rams, like a very similar archetype of back where he's not known for busting those big like breakaway runs, but he'll keep you on schedule, be really patient and fight through contact and pick up hidden yardage. That's how Kaytron Allen is. Honestly, like through 2 games, I feel good about my preseason evaluations of both he and Nick Singleton. I think both are going to play in the league. I like Allen a little bit more than Singleton. Singleton give you a little bit more pop on contact. He's got better breakaway speed, more straight line juice. But I just think when you look at all of these guys, or when you look at both of these guys, I think both project well to the league. I think you're going to lean on both of them as you get into conference play. I don't have as much worry about that group. And I will say too, like, talking about like the past game and Drew Aller, like, there are certainly some highs. I mentioned the lows, some of the misses and the miscommunications. It is now that we're starting to see like, all right, Devontae Ross was not healthy going into week 1 against Nevada, right? So he was fully healthy, much more a bigger part of the game plan here against FIU. Seeing all these guys kind of work in tandem, it is a complementary skill set. When you're looking at all these guys, I think Ross is the vertical threat, vertical stretch guy. Pena is your best, yards after catch, get him underneath, shallow crosses, gadgets, jet sweeps, all those kind of things that you want to scheme some stuff up for. Hudson, I mentioned him last week in terms of being like, yeah, maybe he's not the most explosive, not the twitchiest athlete, but possession, boundary, run a deep dig, run a hitch route on 3rd and 5, and he's going to get you 6. Like, I think that's going to be his best role. And then you've got Clifford. Liam Clifford is the prototypical, like, wide receiver 4, dirty work guy. He's going to, he'll line up to the backside and he can occupy a corner while you have, Pena running underneath that. I think that there are a lot of ways that you can utilize all 4, and I think that they complement each other well.
And it's, when you talk about the skill set group, like, again, this is one of those, as a Penn State fan, you say, kind of used to pray for times like this, right? In the last couple of years, at least, especially in that gap between Dotson, Chris Godwin, KJ Hamler, Ja'Shawn Hamilton until now. You think about the complementary asset of this group is it was Tyler Warren, and hope that Amari Evans can take the top off for a play in a particular game, or hope that you get something from one of these other receivers. Now you're starting to push some guys down into, I'm a big believer in like slots, in like slotting in sports, like, covering baseball as much as I do. I think about bullpens and I think about the slotting of bullpens. And when you have guys in the right places, I think that's when you get the most out of them when it comes to like a setup guy or a closer or whatever it might be. I think the same can be said for a wide receiver group, where if you have a guy who can line up in the slot and do that kind of dirty work stuff, and then you have 2 guys on the outside, one can take the top off, the other one gets you short and intermediate routes. It allows you to kind of combine all of these things together into an effective flowing offense, one that isn't just centered around get the ball to the tight end, get the ball to the running backs, or hope that somebody breaks open.
I'm going to be honest, man. As we're talking this out, there's an NFL parallel here with this offense, with this group, with this entire unit, that it's actually really interesting. When I think of the Green Bay Packers, okay, they don't have like a wide receiver that you would pencil in as like, oh, like he's a pure wide receiver 1, but all of them slot in as like specific roles. You can use them in different ways. They're hoping that their 1st round pick, Matthew Golden, becomes that guy. Some people are hoping that, but honestly, internally in that building, they don't want like a wide receiver 1. They want everybody to be able to chip in and kind of fill their roles well. And that way, when their number is called, they're able to come through with what they do well, put them in position to succeed. They've got a smash mouth run game with Josh Jacobs. The offensive line, that's not a mashing unit, but everybody like is their assignment sound, technically sound. They're versatile. They can do a bunch of different things. And then Matt LaFleur schemes things up where, okay, like you're going to be able to, if it's 3rd and 5, they're going to run like a cool gadget play or a creative screen play or, this motion and this shift. And they got, but the big thing is Jordan Love, right, is a big game hunter at the quarterback position, is ultra aggressive. He's going to push the limits. He's going to go for the deep post. He's going to throw the deep dig. He's going to make that opposite hash throw to give you those explosives on top of those layups. And when I look at the way that this Penn State offense is built, and I say, okay, receivers, very similar to how I described Green Bay. The offensive line, very similar. You look at the run game; they want to be focused on the ground. Then you look at the scheme and Andy Koltanecki and what they want to try and do. Yeah, they're going to be able. Yeah, I've heard like some complaints about like, oh, they're getting too cute, and that's why they can't get into a rhythm. No, like. I like an offense that's a little bit weird, especially in college football. Like try some things. If you don't necessarily, especially if you don't have blue chip talent at every single position. Yeah, like make yourself hard to game plan against. The big thing is, and we talked about this in the very first episode we did a few weeks ago. When I look at Drew Aller, last year's Drew Aller, to me, was just a little bit too conservative, a little bit too like, let me get deep into my progression. Let me hit the check down a little bit faster. I want to see him test those windows at the intermediate area, at the deep area, a little bit more consistently. And we've seen him hit a couple of big plays. He hit Hudson last week against Nevada. He hit Ross this past week on the stutter go for a touchdown. Outstanding catch by Ross. We've seen him strike those opposite hash throws to Pena back last week against Nevada. So while it's been a little bit up and down, it's been a little bit volatile, to me, the big thing is if you look at Drew Aller and you say, all right, like this is the reason to get excited. If he can carry this level of aggressiveness and now you get explosive plays with the run game, with the creativity, now you're humming as an offense. Now you are pretty tough to game plan against. So I think to me, like as we were talking this out, a parallel to Green Bay is I think it's pretty apt with this group.
I like it. And I think you're right. You bring up, Dobbs and Watkins and Wicks. And then Matthew Golden, of course, is, as you brought up, the first-round pick, maybe be a little bit more. But it's a good group. And I think the immediate thought is like, well, you don't have a wide receiver one. It can't be a good wide receiver room. And I don't know if that's necessarily true if everybody is able to play complementary football. Like, even in the NFL, across the landscape of 32 teams, are there 32 number one receivers? Probably not, right? I think if you think about number ones, you think about true, legitimate, bona fide number ones. You go Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, those type of receivers. Are there 32 of those types of receivers across the landscape of the NFL? I would lean probably the answer to that question is probably not. And so if you can play complementary ball with your group and, your 3 or 4, biggest receivers, I think you can still have significant results. And maybe it's not a 1,500-yard receiver, but maybe it's 3 900-yard receivers or 3, an 1,100 and 2 800 type of receivers.
Yeah. And I think that's a very viable way to go about things. But, and even like, honestly, like talking about like the weirdness of the scheme and some of the crazy shifts and motions, which we saw this week. You've got Drew Aller lined up as a at quarterback, and then he's going off to the slot, and then it's going to be direct snaps to the running back. And we've seen like Dinkins back there. They do all the kinds of shuffling around. You know who else does stuff like that? Like Oregon, who just put up 69 points on Oklahoma State, right? I think when you look at some of the best offenses in the nation, yeah, it's okay to be a little bit weird. And I think that the Penn State kind of certainly checks that box.
All right, on the other side, we're going to flip the side of the ball. We'll talk more about the defense because I think obviously a shutout stands out to you and who individually stands out because we have something that Penn State did for the first time in a season in 35 years. And they did it in the first 2 games of the season. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll give our top 5s. Do a quick preview of Villanova as we get you set for the final non-conference game of the year. It's the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. We are brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use that code BBPHLY for 15% off. And of course, we're broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. We'll be right back after this. All right, let me tell you about our friends over at Branded Bills, our presenting sponsor and our friends who provide us with unbelievable hats and gear and shirts. And if you're thinking about needing a snapback or you like the trucker hat look, or maybe you're a fitted hat guy, or maybe you're like me who has transitioned to the flat brim hat, but the snapback back. That's what I've kind of gone into as I've gotten a little bit older. It's a style that I like a little bit more. You can get beanies, you can get tees, anything you want at Branded Bills. It is premium headwear and apparel. And of course, we have teamed up with them for an incredible offer. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. If you're looking for your brand to stand out in the crowd, Branded Bills has you covered with the best custom headwear in all of college sports. Start your order, and their dedicated team will help you create an exact custom apparel that fits your look, your style, your budget, and your needs. And they also have a partnership with with Penn State as part of their campus collection. So head on over to brandedbills.com. Use that promo code that's down below my left shoulder. Try to figure this thing out. Below my left shoulder, above my right shoulder. PHLY, 15% off. You can do that at brandedbills.com for 15% off of your first order. Thanks to our friends over at Branded Bills.
We'll now hear from our friends over at Xfinity, because we all know like it's happened to everybody, and this is a nightmare scenario. It's a big game, whether it's college football, NFL, baseball, whatever. There's a big game coming. You're going to a friend's house, you're going to a family's house. You're excited to watch this game, but the setup is a total mess. You got lagging, you got buffering, you're switching between apps, you're trying to find the game, you're trying to find the best way to watch. They claim, oh, I'm a big fan. I'm going to have it set up. But then you feel like you're fan-fished. But if you call yourself a football fan, you've got to have Xfinity. It's the ultimate sports destination. You can find the best games, your favorite teams, all in one spot. And the way to watch, it's next level. You've got the perfect fan flex. You've got all the action right there in your living room. Plus, Xfinity's best picture and sound with enhanced 4K. So clear, it feels like you're sitting right there in the stadium. Sometimes you've got the 4 games going at once. We talked about the quad box earlier in the show, because why not? You can take advantage. You want to make sure you check in on all the action going on around the country. And on top of that, you get real-time notifications. You get live stats right there on the TV. It is literally the best seat in the house every single time. So next game day, make sure that big fan isn't a big fail. Learn more over at Xfinity.com. Xfinity, imagine that. Restrictions apply. Multi-view requires Xfinity 4K cable box TV box.
All right, welcome back to the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli and Fran Duffy, and we have these new really cool name tags, Fran, and I'm still working on them. I have to get placement together because the one that I've made is just kind of sitting over your face. There he is. That's Fran Duffy. You can follow him at FDuffyNFL. I'm Tyler Zulli. You can follow me on Twitter at Tyler Zulli. Let's get into the defense. We'll shift sides of the ball here. It is the 13th shutout for Penn State in the last 10 seasons. That ranks second most among all of college football. I thought numerically they were stout. 3 sacks, 9 TFLs, an interception, a fumble recovery. Keywan Jenkins, who we talked a little bit about at the end of last show, a really good athlete, kind of a windy throwing motion, but can make plays with both his arms and his legs. Very highly touted within Conference USA. Ended up only throwing for 127 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. And as a whole, the defense gave up just 290 yards on 72 FIU offensive plays, which is good for just 4.02 yards per play on the offensive side of things. I think numerically, before we dive into the X's and O's, I think just numerically, this was about as complete of a performance from this defensive group as we probably could have expected, as you can see by the 0 on the scoreboard. But I think when you're talking about how do you dominate the line of scrimmage, how do you dominate a quarterback who has the ability to extend plays, I think on this side of the ball, not a whole lot of complaints from me.
No, it's tough to have a complaint, with this group. We saw some guys return to the lineup, which was good. We saw plenty of bodies. Again, we talk about like the rotation in the secondary and all the different players we're seeing back there. That continued here this week. We're getting a high level of play from Dennis Sutton, who is just like so wired into the snap count right now. He's playing a million miles an hour. It's just great to see him playing to this level, Tyler, after he was banged up, especially in the second half last year, so he never quite looked like himself opposite Abdul Carter. Draft wise, I actually had a buddy reach out and was like, are we sure, like, is Dennis Sutton going to be like a top 10 pick? Like, I don't see like top half of the first round talent personally. Like, I don't quite see that level of player, but look, if he maintains this level and he's having this kind of impact on games as we get into the meat of the schedule against the rest of the Big Ten, I could definitely see him sneaking into like the top 30, top 40. Like, I definitely think that could be in the cards. He plays so hard. He's so violent on contact. He can defend the run. He can get after the quarterback. He'll kick inside at times. He's got a couple of different moves that he's been winning with. So I really like so far what we've seen from Dennis Sutton, certainly.
When you sent me that text and said you're thinking 30, 40, initially my number was, my head was like, that seems a little late, low in terms of, my thought was more 20 to 30, and I'm surprised when you said 30 to 40. But so I was thinking about a player, and it's not a comparison because they are not the same player in the least, but a guy that I think was an ultimate question mark heading into the 2025 draft, this past year's draft, was the edge rusher from Tennessee, James Pierce, who some people were like, that's a top 10 pick. Some people said 25, 27, 29 type of pick because of productivity. Not saying they're the same player at all. James Pierce was an unbelievable athlete, is an unbelievable athlete. When it comes to Dennis Sutton and a player like Pierce, does the upside of Pierce, the maybe unknown but incredible athletic ability, does that project for NFL scouts, or is it more Denai Dennis Sutton, who's a good athlete, but a guy that's always in the right place. You mentioned he's just jumping snap counts like crazy. He's getting off the ball quickly. His numbers are relatively good. I think they're going to be even better this year without Abdul Carter on the field. What's kind of the balance between those two types, like those two archetypes of players?
Yeah, I would say that and that's honestly the way that I have started looking at it in terms of trying to project, like, especially when we're in the fall of like, all right, like, where do I think guys are going to go? I'm essentially like in my mind, like you're taking bets on like the archetype of player, right? And so when I look at, you mentioned James Pierce Jr. Okay, he was hyper athletic. Like you knew, like, all right, he's going to blow the combine away. He was extremely productive on a per snap basis, and like all of his efficiency metrics, like pass rush win rates and pressure rates, like all that stuff through the roof. Right now, a lot of that had to do with they play in a heavy rotation, and he's coming off the bench, and he's doing this. But like all those numbers, like the efficiency metrics were really high. He was really productive getting after the quarterback on a per snap basis. And then the testing was through the roof. So it's like, all right, like check, check, check. Like that's a profile that you can bet on. Now there are other parts of the profile that were a little bit worrisome, but those were the things where it's like, okay, that can get people excited, and that could get him drafted in round 1. Now we'll see if that results in him being a good player in the NFL. I have questions and reservations about that. That's why I was not as high on James Pierce Jr. I'm higher on Denai Dennis Sutton than I was Pierce Jr. at this point last year. When I look at Dennis Sutton, I see more of a profile that typically falls into round 2. Now, here's the thing. When you look at Denai Dennis Sutton and you look at the history of Penn State players, I mean, they blow the doors off the combine historically every single year. Guys like outperform expectation or meet expectation. So when I look at Denai Dennis Sutton, he's not a guy that I'm watching on tape that I would expect to like, oh man, he's going to like jump through the roof and he's going to run really well and this, that, and the other. But if he surpasses that and he tests really well and the film's really good, that's where I'm like, okay, like maybe then you're getting into, he sneaks into the top 30. He goes, 21, he goes 25. And it's like, oh yeah, productive, high character, like just he can defend the run. Like you just feel really good about him. And that's when he could sneak into that point. I think it's more likely personally that he more falls out of that realm and more into like 30s and 40s. And now it's like, oh, you go, the first night of the draft ends and it's like, oh, Denai Dennis Sutton is going to be one of the first picks in the second round. My guess is that as we sit here, he's more likely in that realm as opposed to the former.
It was just looking at some of the edge rushers, the defensive ends that went in that, 40-ish and back range. And it was a bunch of guys that I thought really high of. And I know there was a lot of varying opinions on guys like Nick Scorton, for example. A lot of varying opinions
that kind of player. Yes.
But I think there's a lot of productivity to be had, at least at the college level. JT Tuimoloau was another guy where I think had a wide range of thoughts upon him. But I think there's now that I think about it and I look at the names and I go, they're pretty comparable. And I wonder where Denai Dennis Sutton can project himself into. Can he get ahead of those guys who went 45th to the Colts and went 51st to the Panthers? Yep. Like, can he get into that 30, 32, 33, 35 range as opposed to like 45 or 50?
The way to do that would be to blow the doors, like keep the level of production and impact that he's having right now, and then also kill the pre-draft process, right? Like to me, like that's what he would need to elevate to that point. I would say that my grade on Dennis Sutton right now, personally, is similar to that of Scorton, who I projected as an NFL starter, of Tuimoloau, who I projected as an NFL starter. Again, I had higher grades on both those guys than James Pierce Jr., right? Who went in the first round, and 3-4 years from now, we'll see. But I think that's kind of where Denai Dennis Sutton probably falls. Again, unless he really lights up the pre-draft process from an athletic testing standpoint.
All right, so the rest of the defensive line, I think there's a lot of names to bring up, and you did a lot of extensive film work on the rest of these guys. I think when you talk about Denai Dennis Sutton, the next name naturally that comes up in the Penn State front four is Zane Durant. When those two guys line up together and they kind of shift over to one side of the field, it feels like it's an overload that is really difficult to defend. And I think the ability to move Denai Dennis Sutton on either side of the field, the ability to have Zane Durant next to him or opposite him as playing as the D tackle, I think gives Jim Knowles options on the front four, especially to mix in some of these other guys like Zariah Fisher, who we'll talk about in a little bit, like Alonzo Ford, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think when you line those two guys next to each other specifically, that they become a really difficult task for a guard tackle combo to defend because they can do so many different things. They could stunt, they could flip, They could do a whole bunch of different things that cause a lot of chaos on one side of the field.
Yeah, Durant he's just a really fun player. He's so athletic. His ability to kind of get skinny and, get on the other side of the line of scrimmage is really impressive. Now, you trade some of that athleticism for a lack of anchor in the run game. He can get moved certainly by double teams at that size, and that could be an issue depending on the opponent any given week. But to have him next to Alonzo Ford, who is a little bit thicker, a little bit more stout, I think that certainly helps. And being able to move him around definitely certainly helps as well. I do think that Dennis Sutton is a little bit more stout, from a pound for pound basis. But I think Durant, his ability to wreak havoc is definitely what sets him apart.
So you bring up Alonzo Ford, and I think an interesting stat with it was the second consecutive week that Penn State had an interior defensive lineman, a defensive tackle, record an interception. And not only that, but it was the first time since 1990, so 35 years ago, that Penn State had multiple defensive tackles record an interception in a season. And they've done it in the first 2 weeks. Obviously, right place, right time. But that is an impressive thing. You start thinking about D tackles. I'm not asking them to catch passes. I'm not asking them to pick passes off. So if they find themselves in the right spot and they're able to make the play, just an added bonus for me when it comes to these two guys the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it was a really heads-up play by Alonzo Ford. And honestly, if you told me that they make it 3 in a row and Xavier Gilliam gets a pick this week against Villanova, I'm not going to shout you down off that. I think that Xavier Gilliam, who, by the way, young player, I think he's a second-year freshman. I think he's a redshirt freshman. He looks like he could be a future kind of Zane Durant, a penetrating three technique. He's a very similar build, very similar skill set.
So the last guy that I wanted to talk about, because he made his debut this week, and I know you like him a lot, I believe you like him a lot, is Uriah Fisher. And I think there's a lot of movement on this front four, and that's intentional. They've always done that. There's always been a lot of plug and play, even when they're not as deep, not as talented. But I think he stood out. I think there was a few pressures generated. I think he looked the part after not playing in week 1. I thought it was a good first appearance of the season for Uriah Fisher. Did you see anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think the big thing, just a pure bull rusher, right? He's just going to run right through you. He's going to try and melt your face mask and push you back into the pocket. He did kick inside at times. And so, again, that versatility alongside of Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant, being able to move all those guys around, I think is really beneficial. I don't think that he's got the level of twitch and explosiveness that even Dennis Sutton has. And so that's going to cap what his overall impact is, but just a nice rotational player, certainly, to be able to mix in. I'm going to be honest, man, it's only a matter of time until Chaz Coleman comes in and takes those reps. Cause dude, we mentioned last week, I thought Coleman flashed this week. He looked like a future guy, like a guy, I don't want to say Abdul Carter, number 3 pick, but his length, his explosiveness, how he gets off the ball, some of the movements that you saw from him. He had a really slick, inside spin move early in the game. He had a couple of nice rushes turning the corner. And then obviously late in the game, fourth quarter, he gets that sack fumble and then the fumble recovery and the return. Yep. The athleticism on that kid, he's still very underdeveloped, true freshman. You can tell, body type wise, he's going to really evolve and progress here in the coming months and years. But right now, with what they've got, this is a guy that can come off the bench and can really be a big, important disruptor for them once they get into conference play.
And I think it's funny with Penn State's depth on the defensive line, which is something they've really keyed in on over the last couple of years. It's why they've sent a bunch of guys to the NFL draft. It's why they've really had a good rotation throughout any defensive scheme, whether it was Jim Knowles, whether it was Tom Allen, whether it was Manny Diaz. They've done a really nice job of rotating their defensive ends. I think about the youth, like a Chaz Coleman, versus the experience, but maybe not the experience on the field, maybe just a little bit older players like Uriah Fisher, who didn't play last year, but is on into his redshirt senior season. And I think about last season specifically. There was a guy last year, incredible athlete, really got a chance to play late in the season more than he had, pretty much throughout his entire time at Penn State. And I would have killed for another season of him at Penn State after losing Abdul Carter, was Amin Vanover. And I thought Vanover, was a rotational piece, but a really good athlete, really long, really rangy. And then I think about a guy like Uriah Fisher, who kind of is starting to fit that same build, where it's all right, hadn't played in 2024 because of the injury. Last time he played in 23, he played in 13 games, but it was primarily special teams. He only finished with 17 tackles. It's this mix of guys that are finally getting their opportunity and young guys who are taking the most of their opportunity and putting them together in the best way that they possibly can.
Yeah, and then again, it's similar to the offensive side where you're trying to like build rapport. I think these first 3 games for Penn State on defense is all right. Like, who are guys that we can count on? You know, like it's not necessarily like the communication and the timing and things of that nature. It's more that on the back end and in the secondary. But I think when you're looking at this group, it's like, all right, like, who could be players for us? Who if it's 3rd and 8 against Oregon in the 4th quarter in a 1-score game, like, who do we want out there in our rush package, right? Like, who can we count on? And I think that's what these first 3 games are all about.
All right, so on the other side, we'll get into our top 5, and again, they don't differ too much from last week or between each other. And then we take a look at the final regular season non-conference game of the year. They're going to take on FCS opponent Villanova. Penn State 2-0 before they get set for this final game. They'll have a week off in between, and then they get set with Big Ten play. Whiteout on the 27th against Oregon. Should be a lot of fun. We'll see what these 2 teams stack up, and we'll talk about that Oregon team on the other side. It's the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. We're brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use the promo code BBPHLY for 15% off. We are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. We will be right back after this. All right, let me tell you about our friends over at Cherry Hill Kia. Because listen, if you're looking for incredible affordable SUVs, they've got it. If you're looking for the hottest automotive brand in the industry, it's them. How about this? 7 of their models received 2025 Car and Driver Editor Choice Awards, which is unbelievable considering the fact that there were more than 450 models tested and only 20 models industry-wide received this award. If you're thinking about a Telluride, a Sportage, a Kia, or a K5, a Carnival, a Seltos, a Soul, whatever it is, they've got 450 different models on stock, both in person and 24/7 at kiaofcherryhill.com. Combine all of this with their best warranty in the automotive business, which is 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain, 5-year, 60,000-mile bumper to bumper. And here's what you're going to do. If you can get there in person, that's great. Stop in today. Tell them PHLY sent you, and you'll get $100 in restaurant.com gift cards just for taking a test drive or for completing a trade appraisal. Listen, I know people buy Kias elsewhere. I'm just not entirely sure why. Drive home in your new Kia today. It's just minutes from all bridges, or you can shop online 24/7 at kiaofcherryhill.com.
We'll now hear from our friends over at Ace Hardware Home Services, where they've got that. You know, you've got that outlet that you said you'd fix last summer. Ace Hardware Home Services, they've got that person too, because now they're not just the helpful hardware folks. They are also the helpful home service and repair folks. From plumbing and electrical to heating and cooling, they've got the trusted pros to keep your home humming all year long. Ace Hardware Home Services, they are bringing the helpful home, the helpful you love, from the store now to your front door. Look, we're starting to feel that winter chill. You want to make sure you have the heat cranking at home when you need it most as we get into these colder months. Visit Ace Hardware Home Services online at acehardwarehomeservices.com to get you started on your next project.
All right, welcome back to the PHLY, or the All Nittany Lion podcast, I should say, here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli and Fran Duffy. As we get into our Week 2 wrap-up, top 5, and I've kind of been thinking about this, and it's not necessarily what we would rank the top 5. I guess maybe it is, but it feels a little bit more like power rankings, if you will, because if we go just strictly on the top 5, they are out by the time that this show airs more times than not. It was a little weird last week because of the games on Sunday and Monday, but more times than not, the top 5 and the top 25 are out before the games, or before this show airs. So let's get into our top 5 heading at the end of Week 2, heading into Week 3. Fran, I'll let you go first if you want to give your top 5, and then I'll give you mine after that.
Yeah, so for me, I've got Ohio State at number 1. I think that certainly the big win in Week 1 against Texas carries a lot of that weight. It was at home, but I believe Texas to be a very good team. They came in as preseason number 1. I think Ohio State deserves that, especially as the reigning national champs. Oregon, I've got up at number 2. I mean, just a trouncing of Oklahoma State this past week. And I think when you look at this team, both offensively and defensively, plenty of individual talent. That team feels. The vibes are really, really strong right now with Oregon, watching them. And again, the schedule will play itself out where we get to see them against some big-time opponents. We'll see if they can live up to that number 2 ranking. To me, I put LSU at number 3 only because if it were me personally, if I were an AP voter for the top 25, I would still want to reward teams that do schedule those quality out of conference games. And so LSU going on the road and beating Clemson, yeah, even though they struggled a little bit with Louisiana Tech, like it was a little bit closer than people thought it would be this past week, that win on the road against that defense for Clemson, to me, that carries a lot of weight for me. I then have Penn State at number 4, followed by the Georgia Bulldogs at number 5. So that would be my top 5 as we sit here today.
There you go, friend. There's your top 5 again: Ohio State, Oregon, LSU, Penn State, and Georgia. I don't have a whole lot of changes here. In fact, I think 3 of our 5 selections are exactly the same. And the only difference is where I rank LSU and where I rank Penn State. And it's just a flip, really all it is. I have Ohio State at number 1 as well. Yeah, 70-0 against Grambling State. It wasn't it was their tune-up game, if you will. They just happened to play it after, as you brought up, their first-round game against Texas, or their first week game against Texas. Julian Sayin wins Big Ten Freshman of the Week. He throws for over 300 yards. He has 4 scores. Bo Jackson, not related, but Bo Jackson, nonetheless, the freshman running back, 100-plus yards this week. This week coming up, they have the University of Ohio. They'll probably win that game. It's a good team. They just beat West Virginia. They took Rutgers to the brink, lost 34-31. But I think Ohio State still should probably cement themselves pretty easily as the number 1 team in the nation. I agree with you at Oregon at 2. And Fran, I got to ask you before I even get into this conversation, what happened to the Pokies, man? Oklahoma State, well, they went into Oregon and got trounced.
Yeah, I think that Mike Gundy may have poured a little gasoline on the fire with some of his comments last week and talking about like the unfair advantages in the portal and money and stuff like that. And I think that just kind of lit that fire. But like I said, man, like when you watch certain teams, you watch, and look, I would say that this about the Penn State too. Watching them play, the tight ends like get after it in the run game and in the pass game. The wide receivers get after it as blockers, and to me, that is like evidence of a really good like culture and ecosystem on that side of the ball. And Oregon just gives it to people. Like every single one of them, they are really tough, really physical. They match the identity of Dan Lanning. I know that defense hasn't quite been to like the level of like Alabama, Georgia, what they expected when they hired him, but it's still like a really feisty, competitive group. They went in, they were active in the portal once again on both sides of the ball. Dante Moore's playing really well. That's a good team, man. That's going to be a good team.
I'm glad you brought up Dante Moore because my note on Oregon was Dante Moore can sling it. 77% completion percentage, over 470 yards, 6 TDs in the first 2 games. I know they played Montana State. They took it to Oklahoma State. But as a unit, 1,137 yards in the first 2 games offensively. That's pretty tough to slow down. And I mean, you think about it too, you know, over the last couple of years, the amount of players that they've lost to the NFL in terms of their weapons, right? In terms of last year, Terrence Ferguson, their tight end in the NFL. In terms of the receiving core,
Tez Johnson.
Tez Johnson, I know, undersized receiver, but still was super effective in space at Oregon. They've lost quite a bit of talent over the last couple of years, and they just continue to turn. And then, of course, their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, who is now with the Browns, was really good last year as well. So I'm agree with you. I'm going to go with Oregon at 2. I'm going Penn State at 3 just simply because I jumped Oregon over Penn State and LSU. So I just kind of slid Penn State and LSU down 1 spot apiece. We talked about the Penn State win enough. LSU 23-7 over Louisiana Tech. That game was also only 10-0 at halftime. Their first half drives included an interception, a missed field goal, a punt, and a pair of scores. Listen, Louisiana Tech is a better team than FIU, but LSU, at least numerically, looking at the box scores and things like that, didn't look stout offensively as they did, or as I would have expected with Garrett Nussmeier. Now, defensively, they were great. They held Louisiana Tech to 154 yards, and they were 3 for 13 on third down. They were dominant on defense. But I think in that regard, both of those teams, Penn State and LSU, both played probably subpar offensive games for the most part. So I just took both of those teams and moved them down 1 spot, having Oregon jump them. And then Georgia, that defense is nasty. I know they played Austin Peay, and you're expected to win that game. But they gave up 196 yards. They were also 3 of 13 on third down conversions. Gunnar Stockton wasn't great in this one, at least numerically. They had some bad first half drives as well, kind of a common theme amongst these non-conference games, amongst the top 10 or so teams. But that defense is nasty as well. I agree with you on Georgia. One honorable mention that I want to throw out there, because I am a huge fan of this guy. I liked him last year. I thought he was one of the most improved players last year, and he continues to pick up right where he left off, despite losing some receivers of his own. I am a huge Luke Altmaier fan, and I think this Illinois team is really, really good. I'm not ready to say they're top 5 good, but I think they might be in that 8, 9, 10 range, and I think that they might continue to surprise some teams down the stretch. I thought they played really well against Duke this weekend.
Yeah, Gabe Akis off the edge defensively is a good player. I don't think he's a great player in terms of like NFL prospect, but a rock solid player off the edge for them as well.
All right, so one final thing, and obviously we're not going to dive too much into this Villanova game. They're playing an FCS team. Last year, I will say Villanova ended up losing in the second round of the FCS playoffs to Incarnate Word. They beat Colgate in their first game of the season, 24-17. Pat McQuaid, their quarterback, threw for just under 300 yards. But I do want to ask you this, because you brought it up kind of in passing earlier in the show, and I'm curious your thoughts. You said about LSU still scheduling good non-conference opponents. I imagine that's probably your answer. But where do you sit on this play good teams to test your mettle in the non-conference versus play cupcakes and go 3-0 and pad your win total in hopes that it looks favorable upon you if you were to lose a conference game, or even if you were to maybe lose 2 conference games? Where do you kind of fall in that conversation?
It's interesting because we're now a few years into the college football playoff and the committee and like how they're viewed and all that. We've got years and years of the selection committee with March Madness. And so there's like a select, like, all right, like there's things that we take as truths. With the college football playoff committee, there's been turnover. It's a smaller committee. And so like, what applies in 2019 doesn't necessarily apply in 2022, doesn't necessarily apply in 2025. There's been inconsistencies there in terms of how the committee has viewed, this team has a lot of wins versus this team, they had one tough loss against a high quality out of conference opponent, right? And so I think you can make the argument either way. Me personally, and that's what like when I'm doing like if I'm doing my rankings, like me personally, I want to see, like, if I'm going to put you up there, above Penn State, who they've played. We know the opponents that they've played. I want to see, like, all right, what did you do on the road against Clemson? What did you do when the number 1 team in Texas came to your house, right? And so, what did you do when you faced another Power 4 opponent with what Oregon did to Oklahoma State? So, me personally, I value more the teams that have the stronger out of conference schedule. Now, again, the committee. And at the end of the day, like, you are playing if you're trying to compete for a national championship, you're trying to get to the college football playoff, you have to please the committee. So whatever you think the committee is going to do to get you in a favorable advantage to try and get into the playoff, you're going to do that as an organization. And so I can see it from both ways. I just trend more towards, I'd rather see you go up against the bigger competition.
I think it's fair. And the reason that I ask is because it's no surprise and it's no like, oh my gosh statement that Penn State has not scheduled very difficult opponents for the most part in their non-conference recently. This year, Nevada, FIU, and Nova. Last year, West Virginia was probably their scheduled toughest game. Bowling Green gave them the toughest game, but it was West Virginia, Bowling Green, and Kent State. And Kent State last year, Fram, Kent State might have lost games to a significant amount of the FCS teams. They were just not good last season. But it goes back even further. Delaware, UMass, Central Michigan, Ball State. Now, they did schedule Auburn. They had a home-and-home with Auburn in 21 and 22, which turned out to be a good enough non-conference game. But Penn State has won 24 consecutive games over non-conference opponents during the regular season. The last time Penn State lost a non-conference regular season game was the day that they walked into Lincoln Financial Field and Temple beat them back in 2016. The last time Penn State lost a non-conference home game was the day that Blake Bortles walked into and Storm Johnson walked into Beaver Stadium and the UCF beat Penn State going back to 2013. They have won 33 straight games against teams that are not ranked in the AP poll. Now, some of that includes Big Ten play, so that is what it is. But it's the conversation of, like, are they maybe scheduling too easy of a schedule where now if you falter in Big Ten play, even if you lose to Oregon or to Ohio State, does that loss get magnified because you didn't play anybody good in the non-conference?
Yeah, you have a smaller margin of error. And I think the big thing too, to me, with the expansion of the playoff and the continued expansion of the playoff, that should now like give teams more motivation. Oh, let's Penn State, Alabama, let's do a home and home, right? Like I think to me, if you have a wider pool of teams that are now being accepted in, you should be more willing to, because now that if you do win that game, well, now all of a sudden, like, all right, that gives you even more ammunition for the committee. I think the big thing too that's interesting. A lot of the teams that you mentioned there in terms of the out of conference schedules are inside the footprint, like inside the recruiting footprint. And I'd be interested to kind of talk with people there that, kind of set that schedule, whether it's, obviously James Franklin is going to have it, but even like with Pat Kraft, with the AD, in terms of like, a lot of times when you see those home and homes or, those kind of situations, typically it's, hey, we want to get some visibility outside of our recruiting footprint. To me, it looks like Penn State's thinking here is, we just want tune-ups, right? We want to get geared up for the Big Ten, which, I get the idea there, but usually it's like, oh, we want to make sure let's schedule something with, UTSA. And even if we do a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1,
sure,
where they come up to us one time, we'll go down there, we'll play them in AT&T Stadium. And now we've got some visibility down in the state of Texas, wherever you want to recruit, wherever you want to make sure you place your priority. But I think that strategy is interesting, certainly.
Well, and I will say this past weekend when they played FIU, that was years ago, was not supposed to be FIU. It was supposed to be Virginia Tech.
Yeah. And
the series got canceled. So COVID canceled their series in Blacksburg in 2020. So it was supposed to be a 2020-2025 split. And when COVID canceled the game, Virginia Tech in turn said, well, if you're not going to come to us, we're not going to come to you. So that game ended up being, so they had to add FIU to the schedule. And I don't even think Virginia Tech is the Virginia Tech of old. But if you just nominally, Virginia Tech versus FIU looks a whole lot better.
No question. And that also would check the box in terms of like, all right, like at least you're getting a little bit out of the footprint. But
right.
Look, Virginia, Penn State has made plenty of good inroads in Virginia. I'm pretty sure Rojas is from Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. Like, they've definitely pulled some good players out of that area of the country as well.
Yeah, all it took was Sam Ficken to miss 4 field goals and an extra point in a game against the Cavaliers all those years ago. And that's when it started, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, so Villanova this weekend, just very, very quickly. I don't think there's a ton to add into this conversation. It's a good FCS team in terms of they've had a style of success, especially recently. 2021 playoff contenders, 2023 they won a playoff game. Last year they won a playoff game. They've been to the quarterfinals back-to-back years in the FCS level. In terms of FCS opponent, it's a quality one, but in terms of getting ready for Oregon, again, probably could have, it leaves a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, I ultimately, this is one of those situations where it's not lose-lose, right, for Penn State. But I think at the end of the day, you'd like them to go out and it looked like what Oregon did to Oklahoma State last week. Like, you'd love this to be a 70-3. You'd love this to be a 52-7 type of ball game here if you are a Penn State fan. If it's not, and we saw the same inconsistencies that we saw last week, then you and I will be sitting here 1 week from now saying the same things, like, hey, like that's what these games are for, iron out these details. You would love, though, to be able to go into the bye week, number one, healthy, number two, looking real, like the best you've looked all season should be this week at Beaver Stadium. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on.
All right, Fran, well, the next time we talk, it will be a bye week, as you mentioned, but it will be the end of the non-conference schedule, and Oregon awaits in 2 weeks' time from the next time that we speak. So for Fran Duffy, I'm Tyler Zulli. Thanks so much for hanging out with us on the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. Head on over to brandedbills.com. Use the promo code BBPHLY for 15% off your first order. As always, we are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. Penn State and Villanova this weekend to wrap up the non-conference schedule. And then, yes, the daunting task of Oregon coming to town on September 27th. We will talk to you next week at 5 o'clock, right here on the All Nittany Lion podcast, brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. See you next week.
We all silly like the mayor.